we should start by a round of introductions. We'll go in order. If you can please just introduce yourself, your role in the company, and how the company's net zero journey is looking like at the moment. I'll ask several questions on that later, so don't give your full answer just yet. But René, we start with you.
Yeah, so the name is René Groot Bruinderink. I work for FincoEnergies, which is a company that is delivering fuels and biofuels to the road and ocean networks in Western Europe. Of course, we increasingly supply biofuels to the network. At the moment, we operate around 25% of the biofuel in the Netherlands. I personally work for the division Carbon Management, where we operate on the voluntary market and where we work on carbon certificates that we produce on the basis of the biofuel that we deliver into the network. So in the voluntary market, working with cargo owners and resellers to support them on their decarbonisation journey to reduce their Scope 3 emissions.
Thank you. Kristin?
Hi, good morning. My name is Kristin Hughes. I oversee sustainability for Diageo. For those of you not aware, Diageo is home to many lovely brands like Guinness, Johnny Walker, Don Julio. We have quite a carbon intensive approach to how we make our products. Distilling and brewing takes a lot of energy. So we're definitely looking to find ways to be more energy efficient, to switch to biofuels where the opportunity exists, and also to really drive decarbonisation, not just within our own operations, but also throughout our supply chain. So I look forward to talking about that. And can I also note, this is such a fascinating setup to be looking out and just seeing all these headphones and green dots. It's really quite entertaining, isn't it? I think I might take a photograph of that too. So thank you, and lovely morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wendy Whewell. I'm Head of ESG and Climate Change for the Corporate and Commercial Bank at Santander in the UK. I have a very privileged role, privileged because it's so exciting to be looking at how we deal with our data challenges. And yes, all banks have data challenges, much the same as the businesses that we look after, but also thinking about products and services. And the best bit is actually working with our clients to see how we can support them in the journey to get to net zero. In particular, businesses who might work with Diageo with regards to what they need to do, how they need to do it, notwithstanding all the challenges that they're facing today.
Brilliant. Robert?
Perfect. Thanks. My name is Robert Olrog. I'm a senior consultant at Carbon Limiting Technologies. We are an innovation consultancy focusing on clean technologies. So we support a lot of innovators within this space to scale and grow. We work with a lot of governments to deliver programs to accelerate the green economy, and we work with a lot of corporates with open innovation challenges. We believe that innovation is required to decarbonize, but innovating in this space is very difficult and faces a lot of challenges. Huge investment levels, long commercialization timelines, and a lot of corporates that are risk averse. And we're trying to support the ecosystem to help innovation in this area to decarbonize.
Brilliant. I keep on checking on my clock, and we're doing really good with time, so great. Now, when we talk about supply chain, of course, there's always this discussion about Scope 3. Oh, yes, close to my mouth, sorry. So we talk about Scope 3, and we talk about upstream and downstream emissions. And of course, every time we look into the Scope 3 of any company, is typically greater than anything that is within the control of that company. If we were to discuss a bit about your own value chains, let's start with Finco and Diageo, because of course you guys have your own direct supply chain to work with, whereas I think for Robert and Wendy is more like enabling also further decarbonization down the line. So if we were to just focus for the moment on you guys, how are you engaging with the supply chain? And if you can walk us through the typical supply chain in the transport sector, and of course for Diageo, maybe elaborating a bit on the complexity, right? Like how big, where is it based, and so on.
Yeah, so we are a company that is purchasing biofuels, of course, to the highest standards, and we have our own sustainability board that really looks into the quality of the fuels that we are procuring. So we then store it, we blend it, and we deliver it into the networks of the road and the ocean-going vessels. Of course, with that, Scope 3 is massive for ourselves. And as a company, we have reduced Scope 1 and Scope 2 almost completely. We're on track also to reduce the overall emissions down to 80% by 2035. But the main purpose of carbon management, so the division in which I'm working at the company, is to support. I'll wait for this one.
Thanks to René, we've been unlocking the power of global entertainment on the Business and Supply Chain Hub, while Louis Stevens and Caroline Bates will be discussing from purpose to proof on the Food Systems Hub. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interactive organization over here. So our customers are cargo owners, companies like Diageo that are supporting and transporting lots of goods all over the world. And it's very complex to reduce transport-related emissions because companies typically have difficulty to work directly with the carriers or the logistic service providers to reduce emissions. There's green programs, eco-delivery programs. And with the solution that we have developed, which we refer to as good shipping, we are able to detach cargo and fuel. And on the basis of a book and claim methodology, we are creating inset certificates that cargo owners can directly use to reduce their emissions. And that is a market that is nascent. The market is developing fast, also supported by science-based targets, which I think we will get to. And that is basically helping cargo owners and resellers to really reduce their emissions related to transport, especially focusing on scope 3. With the delivery of good fuels, so the sustainable biofuels, of course, we help our customers to reduce scope 1 emissions in the road and in the ocean networks.
Thank you. Kristin?
Yes, thank you. So at Diageo, Scope 3 makes up around 94% of our emissions. So only 6% is really within that control of our own operations. And before, when I was talking about we are on a path to decarbonize within our own operations, clearly we also need to work throughout the supply chain to address that other 94%. The biggest areas where we have the greatest emissions we see in packaging. So we use a lot of glass, and glass is very heavily high in emissions. So we're working really closely with a number of our suppliers, both to lightweight. So the innovation was mentioned earlier. Absolutely looking for those really critical innovations that will help us to lightweight glass. Also working with some innovations that are coating glass so we can reuse it through the circular economy approach. So reusing 6, 7, 8 times more than you could already. And actually this works very, very well in places like Africa, where people are so used to bringing the glass back, the bottles. So we see a lot of these innovations that are helping us to remove, right now, almost 30% of our carbon emissions in the glass can be reduced through these lightweighting efforts and through the coating for the circular economy. Similarly, in raw materials, that's another 30% of our Scope 3 emissions in agriculture. So we're working really, really closely with farmers and ag suppliers to both support fewer inputs into the land, which also helps with soil health and also through the regenerative process. Hopefully, we also then can find a way to pull some of the carbon. So raw materials, packaging, and then logistics is the third area, which is a massive footprint for us in that Scope 3. So it's wonderful to hear about your efforts in biofuels, because we're looking to work with a number of our suppliers to try to drive that Scope 3 effort down. Similarly, what we're finding is that within our tiers of suppliers, of course, our Scope 3 is not just one supplier group, it's their supply chain and and into the tail. So we're trying to help all of our suppliers to both understand and map their own Scope 3, because of course it all ladders up and impacts ours. And through that, we're developing with them Scope 3 roadmaps and analysis so they can actually track the data, and then we can all progress together. And then we're working with banks like Santander to help the suppliers with de-risking mechanisms, some bridge loans, etc., that can also help them with some of the investments they need to make. Again, back to the glass, if you want to decarbonize a glass furnace, it can be $30 to $40 million. Right, that's really significant. So if we're asking that of a small supplier, they're going to need a loan of some sort. So we're working really closely with a handful of forward-thinking banks to bring them those loans and then to de-risk them on the other side. So there's one of these areas where I'd almost say it's uncommon collaboration quite regularly, where we can ensure that we've got the insurance to back up the farmers, we're bringing loans in to support the packaging manufacturers, and then we're just trying to address throughout our entire supply chain. We have almost 30,000 suppliers, so you can imagine that is a very, very difficult and complex undertaking.
I was about to ask how many suppliers, because I think that elaborates on the complexity, but you are navigating that complexity, which I think is encouraging for any business that is out there. I mean, it is a task, but if you have an organized supply chain and you know it, it's far easier to try and tackle the monster, I suppose. Okay, so moving on to Robert and Wendy, I guess in your case, because you're enabling that decarbonization journey, it will be interesting to understand how are you promoting, in your case, Wendy, how are you promoting amongst your clients that decarbonization journey? And we were just discussing before the panel how diverse that journey is for every company in different sectors. And then if I can ask, following that, to Rob, how is your journey in terms of enabling that decarbonization journey from the innovation point of view and the SME role, which is very important, as Kristin was elaborating on, but sometimes more difficult because of resources, because of funding, and so on and so forth. So if we can start with Wendy, maybe, on that one.
Thank you. So it's really interesting. Yes, we are an enabler, but like all other businesses, if we are to get to net zero, which is one of the pillars of our environment, and our ambition, then every single company that banks with us, that borrows from us, needs to get to net zero. So, great word, enabler, because we need to take everybody on that journey and to have the conversations with them to understand what the challenges are and where do they start. And we were talking earlier about that narrative, about that language. Some businesses, when you start saying, where are you on your net zero, your scope 1, your scope 2, scope 3, if you're not lucky to work with Diageo, you might be thinking, gosh, I don't understand any of this, and where do I start? So I see our role very much to start that conversation with a business, getting them to understand the challenges that they might be facing, getting an understanding as to whether they've actually started thinking about where they are, what they need to do, and then breaking it down for them. First of all, looking at whether they want to be a first mover so that they actually are going to get to net zero by 2035, 40, or actually whether they're going to stay within the pack. But also bringing to life that actually, if they don't decide to move forward quickly, then they may find that partnerships with the businesses that they work with will not be able to work with them because they're not on the same trajectory. It's also a question of talking about language. So actually a lot of the things that businesses can do, and those that have moved fast and forward very quickly are already seeing, is actually they're seeing an improvement in their cost base. We talk about the improvement in energy efficiency. Businesses are looking at exactly how they use their energy by using sensors, perhaps by putting solar panels, working with their tenants, if they're a property owner, to see how they can really improve those properties, but not just from the energy efficiency, but also protecting them from an insurance perspective in looking at actually, am I likely to be a victim of flash flooding? Do I need to think where my electrical sockets are? Do I need to think about what do I do with regards to packaging or goods that are ready to go out for collection? The reason why I mentioned that is one of our clients actually had about 250,000 of goods ready for collection for the next day. That night, that property was flooded for the third time, and you can imagine losing 250,000 of goods. Not only was it a cost, but all that effort, that time, and energy that had gone in producing all those goods had gone to waste. So we start on a journey. We start having we have questions, but we're looking at it as to how we can work with them on a partnership and collaborate with them, and also stress the importance of working like Diageo are with their supply chain. And I love what you just said about that 1, 2, and 3, because that's really important to me. If Diageo's final end supplier, which probably in this case would be your farmer, if they're not thinking about the farmer and the challenges the farmer's got, then they're never going to get to net zero. So this is a real partnership, how we all work together on that journey.
If I can just build on that really quickly, this is such an excellent point. Even at the beginning when you said you want to talk to suppliers about scope 1, 2, 3, how many farmers do you think even understand what scope 1, 2 or 3 is? And by the way, they have so much else that they're trying to tackle. So whatever we can do that helps bring them along the journey, and again with you in that partnership, is really, really valuable.
Maybe on that point, because I think this is quite relevant to lots of companies, how, in practical examples, how are you doing that engagement with your supply chain? Is it through workshops? Is it through having kind of in-house capacity to support them in calculating it? If you can just walk us through very quickly, because I think it's quite an interesting journey.
Well, there are a couple of different mechanisms that we use. I mean, we're still very nascent on the journey. But one is, I mean, you mentioned workshops, but we're working on a number of tools and even roadmaps that will help, almost like a playbook. Here are a couple of different options that help. And I would say that's probably other suppliers beyond the farmers. With farmers, we're working with collective action through a number of other, let's say, platforms. So working with collaborators like Pepsi, other businesses, PepsiCo, Nestle, and ourselves, then working within a specific landscape to support a handful of suppliers from them, as well as those farmers who will supply to Diageo. We're also then in those landscapes bringing government on board, bringing banks, insurance, and so then the farmers see other benefits by coming and working with us. And so to your point, that's probably where we have almost a town hall and provide some workshops so we can educate on what it is we're trying to do that brings that support along. What we're finding is in places like East England, the farmers are getting access to things like renewable energy that they didn't realize they even needed or wanted, but different energy suppliers are showing up at our workshops, and it's almost like a trade show in a sense, and so we create a marketplace that allows farmers to find more accessible opportunities to decarbonize.
So acting as enablers in that case too,
exactly,
which is great. Right. So I guess part of the solution is also innovation in SMEs, and we often hear how there's amazing solutions out there, but they need to be scalable. They need finance, and sometimes it's quite difficult for SMEs to continue afloat in this very diverse pool of solutions that is out there. Walk us through a bit, Rob. How is that journey for SMEs? How have you been supporting them, and what's the role of innovation in all of this that we're discussing?
No, absolutely. I'll talk a little bit more generally about how we work with supply chains, and SMEs is an integral part of the supply chains, but you need kind of those to work together with the broader ecosystem, so potential end users, bigger international corporates, but also innovators. So as a consultancy, we usually employ methodologies and approaches to try to bring supply chains, innovations, and SMEs together. One of them that I would like to talk about is a program that we're running, which is demand-led innovation, which is a concept where end users of a potential technology or some innovative material, for example, the one we're running right now is within low-carbon concrete, kind of articulates a need to buy low-carbon concrete in the future at certain volumes, at certain prices, at certain carbon intensity levels. And then if they articulate that need, that de-risks innovations, SMEs, concrete producers, to be able to invest in the technology, to be able to then in the future provide low-carbon concrete solutions. And the reason why you need the supply chain to come together is this is a very complex sector, requires a lot of investment, there's a lot of regulations, and there's a lot of moving parts within the supply chain that all needs to collaborate on this. At this point, we're very close at signing our first advanced offtake agreement where end users come. So these are construction companies, project developers, engineering firms come together and say, actually, this is a really good solution. We have insurance on board. We're quite comfortable with the supply chain. We'll be able to deliver the volumes. But you need everybody to kind of say, okay, well, let's try to work on this together. And how this leads into just how to incentivize and energize SMEs within the supply chain is they usually are a bit resource constrained. They're usually a bit risk averse. The economy, they can feel is a bit difficult sometimes. And there's a bit of a skills gap as well. So all of these things coming together say like, okay, how can we prioritize decarbonization in this type of environment? And how does that fit into our overall survival strategy? And the key here is to kind of have convening programs, energizing programs, so people, trade organizations, government institutes, and the UK has a lot of these catapults, different universities. For example, in the automotive sector, they have the Advanced Propulsion Center to kind of bring the different stakeholders together, provide a bit of financial support, provide a lot of resources and expertise, and identify challenges that they can work on together that they feel are overcomable. So yeah, a bit of a broader how we work with the supply chain, and we think demand-led innovation is a really excellent way to stimulate innovation, and we think that there needs to be a convening force with SMEs to be able to get them to work together to solve common challenges, because alone they don't really have the resources to solve them.
An interesting point, because we've seen also how very big industries as well, not only SMEs, are coming together trying to solve common issues when it comes to suppliers, maybe because they share the same suppliers or because the industry in itself needs a major transformation. Okay, so we've spoken about your value chains and how you're navigating them. And of course, we all know there's challenges. And part of what convenes us today is to how are we navigating those challenges? So I'm going to ask different questions to each of you now here, so we can go more in depth into your own different sectors. If we start with René, because you haven't been speaking for a while, I want to give you the mic. What's the challenge when it comes to your clients, the one that, of course, need the transportation, moving goods from A to B? What's the challenge for them to uptake your solution? What has been the major barrier that you've seen? Is it cost? Is it lack of understanding? Is it changing the where they're doing business? What would you say is that time, and how you're navigating it?
Yeah, so for our customers, the major challenge is that they are acting on a voluntary basis. So our customers are in any way not obliged to reduce their Scope 3 emissions by any legislation at all. So it's complete voluntary action which they want to take on with the usage of certificates. I've been in the front seat of the roller coaster ride on the voluntary carbon market when it came to offsetting certificates. And it's great to hear, Robert, as well, that you're working on the climate projects, and I so much support those. But then we talk about compensation or beyond value chain mitigation. My team is working with our customers on insetting solutions, which is basically a solution that is directly within the value chain and that is targeted at reducing emissions, in my case, transport-based from their logistical operations. The field in which we operate is also driven by lots of mandates and regulations. FuelEU Maritime, ETS legislation, IMO picking up, and I can mention many more abbreviations. So increasingly there is a strong demand to get more biofuels as a transition fuel. We all understand that this is not the final solution, but for transport it is a transition fuel into the system, and it's great to see that that volume is increasing. But then, of course, the question gets back to additionality. So what is then the investment of a customer beyond what is mandated? And that is the main challenge that my team and my product management and sales team are engaging with our customers on a continuous basis, understanding that it's a voluntary market, understanding that sustainability budgets might be under pressure at the moment. We work with very long lead times, but we fortunately also work with customers that are really committed on this voluntary basis to progress the evolution. So this is what we are navigating, and it's great to see that also with the help of digital platforms, which we also have these helped ourselves, the market has become much more transparent, and that the certification processes and the quality of the certificates is really reaching the highest standard now.
And great to see is starting to become mainstream in some industries, or hopefully we expect it to be.
Insetting
right?
is becoming better known. Of course, it has a more background more in the agricultural world, especially, but it's becoming better known, and it's also becoming more and more recognized also by bodies like the Science Based Target Initiative.
Thank you, René. I'm gonna mix things up. I'm gonna go with Wendy now. Wendy, one key thing is, and we were talking about it earlier as well, is how are your clients and the companies you're supporting articulating the net zero business case? And also, have you seen that the climate journey is directly linked to business performance? How have you seen these companies being able to to put out the narrative in a way that it really conveys the message on this transformation, this journey, and making the business case internally and externally.
Thanks, Paula. So it's really interesting that where those businesses that actually can see that there is a benefit, they're moving forward quicker, and they have got their strategies, and that they are actually seeing rewards for having a good strategy in place and actually starting to get the benefit of renewable energy. When you talk to businesses, a lot of them have already started on the journey. They just don't realise they've started on the journey. They're already thinking about their electricity, their carbon footprint with regards to transport. But sometimes they just haven't pulled it all together. So that's the biggest challenge for them. One of the things that Kristin just said, what I do is actually try to bring businesses that have actually already started on the journey and some businesses that haven't started on the journey, and they swap stories and they talk about the challenges, how they overcame them, and actually what was good and what was bad. And to give you a really great example was we were sitting around the table. We had 3 businesses that had actually put solar panels on the roofs of their premises. 2 of the businesses had had a really good experience. One of the businesses didn't have a good experience, and they'd all talked about these experiences. If we'd only had the one business that had a poor experience in the room, I'm sure the rest of the clients would have walked away thinking, I don't know whether I want to put solar panels on the roofs. Instead, because the other 2 had had such good experiences and were really benefiting from it, the third person who didn't have that good experience said, you know what, I think I actually was very unlucky, which meant that those in the rest of the room walked away thinking, this is something that we need to do. So articulating that strategy is a really important way to go. I think the problem that we've got at the moment is there's too much information out there. So how do you bring all that information together and put it into a detailed plan? And I think one of the best frameworks that's out there is the transition plan framework. Now, you don't need to write hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. You could probably do 2 pages on each of the topics, but you could also work out what's really important to your business. And I think that helps you just put it all into an order, and then you can decide which are priorities for you. You could also take that and talk to your customers to find out what's important to them so that they could help you on that journey as well. Because I think once you have that, when you're tendering for new business, you suddenly go, they're asking what am I doing from a sustainability perspective, or have I reduced my Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions? I'm able to articulate that. And we're already seeing those requirements coming out from government, whether you're in working for the NHS or any other government area. A contract over £5 million is now looking where you are on that sustainability journey. So I think looking at your carbon reduction plan, setting out a strategy is really, really important.
And we talked about how important it is to kind of simplify the messaging so that it reaches everyone, right? So I guess it's also part of what we were saying is the narrative needs to be accessible to everyone that is not really working on sustainability. And our acronyms and all of our technicalities and all of these things need to be accessible to everyone so that we can really have people joining that conversation.
Yeah, and I think actually at the present time, I'd like to look at it as these are the potential risks to your business, and you could go very easily through your P&L. Where's your turnover coming from? What could actually impact that? Looking at the cost of sales, transport is always going to be a big one. You know, looking at the logistics, thinking, what can I do to improve that? Your premises. But also don't forget, if you're a business that's actually showing all these great works that you're starting to do, you will attract good employees, because employees are looking to work for a business with purpose. And I don't just mean young generation, the older generation, perhaps those who've decided actually I could actually change careers or I could do something different. They too are looking for a business with purpose. So I think it's really important. And then lastly, your shareholders and any stakeholders are really looking to actually see the protection of the investment. And if you look at it that way, then they want to just make sure that you're going to have a sustainable business for the future.
Thank you, Wendy. Kristin, if I can ask you a question, because I take it that you have a lot of buy-in internally to make this happen, to really navigate the way you have with your external stakeholders. What's the challenge with internal stakeholders for companies? Because it's typically also a difficult part, right? Like, how do I get my C-suite to understand the importance of this topic? Is probably not the case for Diageo, but what would you recommend and advise to companies that are challenging right now? Their challenges to get the right people internally on board to collect data or to have the finance in place for funding sustainability. How do you overcome that challenge, or what would you tell people that are navigating that challenge?
It's definitely not straightforward. It's not an easy conversation most of the time. And as Wendy mentioned, companies are looking at P&L. And I mean, Diageo is a publicly listed company. We have to really be thoughtful about returns on our investments, returns generally, returns to the investor. So every decision we make, even in sustainability, we have to be able to link that back to some sort of ROI. And in doing so, we're having to translate. So why does investing in decarbonisation today ensure that we are a business made and prepared for tomorrow? So I think more than anything, the conversations we have internally are very focused on resilience, a little bit on adaptation, and just our license to operate. And if we are not decarbonising and if we aren't front-footed, we will not be a business to survive going forward. So it's really those, I don't mean to be so stark and negative, but it really is painting the realistic picture. Again, I mean, we think about the two biggest ingredients that go into our products are water and raw materials, all the cereals and grains. If we don't have a planet that allows us to grow that food stuff or to access water, we simply will not be able to make the products that people love and enjoy and that we get to sell and make that ROI for the investors and for our board. So always trying to connect things back to understanding climate risk and our own resilience, and that's why we have to be so front-footed and engaged.
And you touch on something quite important, and we just talked about the narrative, and I guess is not only the sustainability speech and narrative to be accessible to everyone at the C-suite or stakeholders, but it's also the financial narrative needs to be interlinked with the sustainability one, and we've seen that quite more often, and it's very encouraging to see how CFOs are now part of the discussion and they understand what we're talking about when we talk about climate. So yeah.
I would say when it comes to CFOs, it's also nice, and Wendy mentioned this too, the word optionality. So we're not just coming in and saying it's absolutely black or white, this is the way we must go, but we can actually show a lot of different places where we can invest in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And biofuels definitely one of those areas where we might test that out in a handful of distilleries and then move it throughout all of Scotland. It's just really nice. I think then the CFO feels like he or she has a bit more control even in the sustainability decisions.
And being part of those discussions from early on, and I guess that facilitates the whole process. Interesting. Rob, if we can talk about a challenge that is quite common to any industry and any level of journey towards net zero, which is data collection, and how are SMEs and in your world navigating that? Walk us through your experience.
Oh, absolutely. So if I put myself in the shoes of a typical SME we support, they typically face two types of challenges. This echoes a lot what Wendy was talking about. First, there's a bit of a knowledge gap. Let's say they want to decarbonize, but they don't want to have the risk of impacting their operations. They're like, well, that's impossible. But no, it's not really. There's a lot of different solutions out there, a lot of different pathways to be able to integrate new technologies, to be able to find ways to lower their emissions and producing the same material or results. And then the second part, once you kind of overcome the knowledge gap and start thinking about the strategy and what they're really trying to achieve with their transition planning or becoming net zero and what that means for their value proposition, you get into the kind of the data challenge. So how do you go about doing it? And I think, we're often trying to help them either innovate internally or with open innovation processes where they can scout what's happening in the field and try to absorb and then deploy innovation abroad. And there's a really big challenge there in that a lot going on. And there's a lot of different pathways. And when it comes to the data that's provided, there's a lot of data gaps, there's a lot of data inconsistencies, it's not really comparable, there's very few case studies as well. And if they are, it's often academic or sponsored by big government institutes, so they're a bit difficult to read. it's a really big problem, like saying, okay, well, we have this, 20 different solutions. We don't know which one to go with. We don't know which one is going to operate better, and we don't know which one works for us. And it creates a point where it's like, okay, we have to wait a bit then until we get more data and they're more established. And if there was instead a centralized or trusted platform or a trade organization or like a framework saying, okay, well, for this type of, let's say, high temperature heat pump solution, we want to test these parameters and we want to ensure that we can operate within these fields and then we can classify a high temperature heat pump like this. It would enable a lot quicker deployment of new innovative technologies in a lot of different sectors.
And sticking to that point, because it kind of links with my following question, which is external factors that are shaping up or speeding up the process. What's the role of AI, blockchain, and all of these emerging technologies in creating efficiency and increasing transparency in the whole process?
Yeah, great question. So I think kind of decarbonizing the supply chain and AI is extremely linked. Supply chains are very complicated. For big companies, they're very long as well and international. There's a lot of unquantifiable risks going on. And you have, and a new risk that is emerging, which was talked about, is climate risk. So the impact of droughts, wildfires, higher temperatures. And it's really hard to like navigate how to mitigate these risks. And even like really big companies have a hard time doing this properly. I think it was 2-3 years ago where BASF, one of the biggest chemical producers in Europe, needed to reduce their production output because the waterways in the Rhine River in Germany were lowered so much that they couldn't transport their feedstock. And this is probably one of their biggest transportation risks, and they didn't really have the mitigation efforts in that. But AI is really good to deal with this. They can take in a lot of complicated information and spit out, oh yeah, well, this is what you have to think about. Specific examples is an AI company called Contour. They've looked at all the climate risks in the world and said, okay, well, in each square meter of the world, or square mile of the world, this is the likelihood of increased climate risks in terms of wildfires or droughts. And you have another company called Climate AI that is looking at this specifically for agricultural supply chains. So saying, okay, well, if it's higher temperatures in these areas, this will take X amount longer for this seed or crop to grow. And there's a bunch of companies doing this in financial services as well, looking at, okay, for insurance companies trying to price in climate risk, how do they do that to appropriately factor that in?
And quite relevant, because we were just discussing with Wendy, we need more insurance available to make this happen. So technologies and tools to enable insurance companies to understand those risks is quite relevant. We talked about regulation a bit in SBTI. We've mentioned it and quite a bit. René, if I may ask you, the role of and the catalyst that can be regulation and guidelines, how is it kind of shaping up the speed at which you can make changes in the transport sector and also in adopting all of these new biofuels solutions?
Yeah, happy to jump in. And I spoke about the mandatory market and the compliance market. So that is clearly driven by regulation, and that is a huge catalyzer for getting more biofuels into the overall transportation system. I mentioned Science-Based Target Initiative. They have released a new draft for the corporate net zero journey. Recently was under consultation. And for the first time ever, in that draft, there is a clear recognition and reference to market-based measures. And SAF specifically is used there as an example. This is exactly the business that we are in. And for us, it's extremely important to see that a prominent body like the Science-Based Target Initiative is also going towards acceptance of book and claim, of insetting allocation pools, direct, indirect, lots of terminology still there. But this is for our customers a very important support that also the Science-Based Target Initiative is moving towards. let's say, this virtual solution, because physical solutions are not always possible in the transport world. If you want to get HVO in your truck, you cannot always fuel it up. So you would be looking for a virtual solution in which you can still claim the direct reduction from using that HVO as a biofuel. Only last week we learned that in the European Commission, this law to prevent companies from making neutralization claims or CO2 neutral claims is at least being postponed. This is really helpful for our business as well, because we don't want our customers to feel scared or to feel nervous about communicating about the efforts that they are making. We need companies to also communicate and report on the emissions that they have reduced in a transparent way, following the methodologies, but also following the standards that are in place. So this whole terminology on green hushing, which we have observed in the past years, where companies were basically not talking about the good initiatives that they were taking on, would be a huge lever for our industry as well to pick up. Finally, on AI, on digitization, platforms are evolving, platforms are also becoming connected, standards are also converging. So with the usage of API connections, the various platforms also will be interacting, and that will also drive a larger volume of transactions across the various platforms. And there is still significant volume already out there, and this volume will increase. Unfortunately, the companies that are quite open about it are the likes of Microsoft, Salesforce, Google, Apple. And we need those companies to further drive the voluntary carbon market, and I'm convinced they will do so.
Thank you. If I may go to you, Kristin, one key element is for some companies is procurement and contracting, and setting up the contracting so that it can enable you to reach your net zero. Of course, you've walked us through your value chain is comprised by so many different stakeholders, some of them whom don't really know what and how to start navigating. So, of course, imposing a contractual ban or limit to them is quite unfair. So how are you navigating that? Is at some point, do you think Diageo is going to start looking at a contractual incentive for those suppliers to be part of your value chain? And what's the timeline for it, if that's the case?
Well, actually, we're already in that phase of contractual negotiations. I would say procurement are very much tied to my hip. The number one business partner, we make so many decisions together. And throughout the time of negotiation, I think any procurement officer will always think about cost and cash that they're bringing back to the business, right? So the negotiation is always trying to drive that cost down and then to get cash into the business as fast as possible. So that's always going to be on the procurement officer's mind. What we've done at Diageo, so those are two very large C's, as it were, and now we've added the third C, which is carbon. So we're actually going and negotiating with our suppliers, what's the cost basis, how fast can we get the cash through the door, and what is your carbon? So because, again, as I mentioned earlier, every supplier's carbon comes back and is a part of my scope 3. So whatever we can do to drive the carbon down throughout that supply chain. And again, we have tools available. We have data collection processes. We have technology platforms. So we're also trying to enable and support our suppliers at the same time. On the flip side, by the way, we're also a supplier, right? So we've got customers like Heinemann, who are your duty-free shops, and Tesco, and they're asking us, right, to do this as well. So we're, on one hand, we're pushing this through our supply chain, but we're also getting the ask very much from customers above.
And I guess that's great because it also trickles down the whole value chain, right? So it creates that effect. How much are you seeing some of your most advanced suppliers already adopting this themselves? Is that a thing for them as well? Are they learning from that experience and then applying it to their own contractual processes?
I think most of the suppliers, especially the advanced, as you're mentioning, are seeing it as a competitive advantage. We're not the only ones asking for recycled glass. And frankly, it's almost difficult to get the volume that we'd like because there's so much competition for it. But we know that the glass manufacturers are trying to get their hands on more cullet because we're asking for it, others are asking for it. Similarly, throughout so many of the other products that we use in the packaging space. So we're actually seeing suppliers, I think, wanting to be a little bit more front-footed. Again, when I talked about 30,000 suppliers, probably about 80 of our suppliers make up the majority of our carbon. So we're starting to work with them first, and then we'll get to the others. But we do, again, have these tools available for the smaller suppliers in the supply chain.
And then again, the power of bringing industry together, because maybe 2 or 3 giants asking the same thing will make it possible for that one supplier to really make the transition.
Yes, so there's collaboration with peers, colleagues, even competitors. And then again, mentioning the customer, there's also that collaboration so we can start to hopefully create a closed loop system and eventually drive also the circular economy, which will of course also help us to decarbonize.
Thank you. Wendy, if I can come to you then with one of my final questions for this section, which is the role of investors and the role of consumers as well for those companies that you're supporting. Of course, we know there's mounting pressure from those two groups. What do you see being the main aspect that companies are trying to or is it both? The companies you're supporting, the role of investors and customers kind of pressing them to make decisions and move faster?
Yeah, I think where we are with the consumer is the consumer. The studies say that the UK population is very much for climate change and wants to see us move quickly and move forward and take action. I think what we're not doing is we're not telling that story, and therefore actually the role of the investor and the shareholder is actually to create that challenge, constructive challenge, and to support on that journey. One of the things that I think businesses are sometimes a bit worried about doing something is because they're well, will it work? What should I do? Where do I start? And as I'm always being told, perfect is the enemy of good, and we need to start on that journey, no matter how small. And one of the challenges that all of our businesses face is actually data. So use the data that you have, whether it's spend data, work with your accounting software, see how they can help you with the measuring of it. There's some great resources out there which are sitting on the SME Climate Hub, or if you're working with somebody like Diageo, they'll have resources that can help you. The banks are there to support. That can all help with regards to that regulation. There's one thing that actually I think is going to be really helpful for the consumer that is about to appear in the next few years, and it's called the Digital Product Passport. You will have all seen QR codes, probably on our dresses, on our shirts, etc. There is currently a code on there. That QR code is suddenly going to provide so much information to the consumer that we're really going to learn about the products and services that we have. It will tell you exactly where the grain has come from. It will tell you where the cotton's come from, what dye is on the cotton. It will tell you how you can recycle the buttons. It will also show you, probably for our youngsters, how to sew a button onto a blouse or a shirt, but also how you can recycle it, where you can recycle it. And those that are developing this IT, this AI, it has really exciting opportunities. And I think by able to telling that narrative about all of our products, that will help people understand and take them on the journey. And I think it will help us move forward. The other thing really quickly to say is this is not a linear journey. This is a journey that's really zigzagging along. Sometimes we'll have highs, sometimes we'll have lows. The most important thing is we start the journey to be able to see the benefits and also to actually protect the planet.
Thank you, Wendy. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask a final question to each of you, and then we'll open for Q&A to the audience. You have quite a journey now. You've gone through several hurdles to get to where you are in your different roles. If you were to give one piece of advice to yourself back in the day when you started this journey, what would that be? What would be the shortcut or the best advice that you would give yourself for navigating the challenge of supply chain decarb?
For me, it's 3 words: patience and perseverance. It's a rough market. The lead times are extremely long. but if you are working on the right solutions, then it will also be recognized.
Thank you. Kristin?
I would say experiment and learn, fail fast, and progress over perfection.
Powerful.
I think Kirsten and René have just nicked them all. I think for me, I used to describe myself as a nosy banker. The word curiosity, I think, is a number one thing for all of us to have. And there's really important. There is no such thing as a stupid question. The most simplest of the questions, asking why do we do something, can be really, really powerful today, because that might be something that will unlock something that we do that could easily have a really positive impact to change the business.
Thank you.
I'll throw in another idiom. It takes a village, but you need to bring people together, and you need to bring them along in a journey, and you need each other to kind of push the momentum forward and solve really complicated challenges.
And I guess on that note, coming together, speaking to people, exchanging ideas, sharing your own best practices is what we're going to do this afternoon. So for anyone that doesn't know, we are going to have roundtable discussions on this topic. Most of the tables are going to be hosted by some of these speakers today. And if you haven't signed up, I have been told you need to do it through the app. It's open for VIP passes. If you haven't, you can upgrade to a VIP pass at the front of house. And yeah, looking forward to engaging with you all. But I'll open the floor. Yes, there's a question there. I know a microphone is coming to you.
Hi, good morning everyone. Great panel here. We have customers, financiers, supply chain and consultants. So very, very impressive panel. So my question is, the biggest challenge we face in supply chain decarbonization is the return on investment, the ROI. We spoke briefly on the ROI, but how do you actually make the ROI very, very lucrative, especially when large corporates are challenged in the current scenario on why should I be now investing in sustainability versus trying to increase my margin, try to increase revenues. So any thoughts on some innovative ideas you have seen to really increase the ROI, to make it really appealing to customers to invest in it, and then persuade their supply chain like the glass manufacturers who have their own challenges and farmers who really are completely stretched to move towards this? And maybe some view on how generative AI and LLM may help as well. So thank you.
5 questions in one.
I could only hear part of it, so apologies. My headphone, well, anyway. But I can answer some of that. So on the ROI question, I think this is a really important one. And I do think it goes back to that translation, because sometimes the ROI is not immediately seen in the bottom line or the top line growth. But we do think our consumers are asking for better products, sustainable products, and our customers are asking for it. On top of that, even some of our investors are these days, and Wendy alluded to that in the earlier question. So it may not always be we put money in and we get money out and you can see a direct correlation, but it's how we translate that, because we do think we see greater uptake on some of our products because we have invested. We have a regenerative agriculture program in Ireland that supports our Guinness. And the Guinness marketing team said it is one of the top things that's supporting Guinness in Ireland. There's such a pride in the fact that we are supporting those farmers locally that really, really drives that. So again, it's translating that approach, I think, a little bit, so versus the direct number to numbers. And similarly, then we also can try to translate that. And I think you asked about a little bit more into the supply chain, but it's attracting good talent. You want to be able to have the right people to come and work for you. And these days, Gen Z in particular, they're really driving for sustainability and then that long-term resilience. So for us in the supply chain, we absolutely have to get it right, because we absolutely have to connect with water and the grains needed. So for us, it's a long-term vision, but also a little bit short-term ROI.
I think we have time for...
In many cases, if companies want to go for a request for proposal process, there is a strong and long list of sustainability criteria that companies need to adhere to. So in many cases, it's also a license to operate in order to secure your business.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last here.
Thank you. Also for Ms. Hughes, you were talking about the need for innovation, not just at Diageo, but across all those 30,000 suppliers to cut your Scope 3 emissions. I'm convinced you guys have like a strong innovation and strategy team in the organization, but not all those 30,000 suppliers will have that as well. And you're not, as a company, experts on glass production or these other kind of innovations that you need. So how do you help those companies in your supply chain identify those innovations that can help them reduce their emissions without having those expertise on those technologies yourself?
So it's a great question because we do have access, we do have an R&D team, and we're constantly looking at new innovations that support us. But very much, I think the way that Robert talked about SMEs, we're also trying to find breakthrough technologies and innovations that can help our suppliers. So when we talk to the suppliers and we're trying to help them with that journey, if we can identify technologies or innovations that will support them, we're very open to sharing that. So a lot of the innovations we're finding, whether it's in water efficiency or in decarbonization, we see that as an open sourced opportunity too. So whilst some of the sustainability, back to the ROI question, can potentially give us a competitive advantage, trying to save the planet is not competitive for us. So if we can find an innovation that will support our suppliers, and to your point, some of them are very small, but we can certainly help to bring those to life.
Can I quickly answer that as well? So you can also create something called an innovation challenge, where you work together with supply chain, identify a big issue, a big commonality for the end user, so you, but also the manufacturers and the SMEs, and try to say, okay, well, we want to work on this challenge together, and then you can start scouting and prioritizing different solutions and innovators or other service providers who can help you address that challenge. So you kind of create a little question mark and saying, okay, let's try to solve that together.
Thank you very much. For anyone else that has questions, we will see you in the afternoon in the session, 1 p.m., and you can look it through the app. And thank you very much to our speakers. Fantastic time.